Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Best in Minds Association's podcast from CSAE. I am Tyrone Adams, your president. For today's podcast, I have the pleasure of talking with Dean West, president of Association Laboratory. Dean leads client engagements and is a frequent speaker and facilitator for the national and global association leadership meetings. Welcome, Dean.
Hey, it's good to be here. I always like my intro. It makes me sound so boring when I'm clearly such a smart ass. So I started putting provocative and conversational in my intro because it seemed to give me the creative freedom to say whatever the hell I wanted. I'm not being insulting. I'm provocative. It just sounds more diplomatic that way.
I totally agree with you. So why don't you fill us in a little bit more about you, so you can put things in your own words, but also let's talk about the Association Laboratory. I mean, what is that?
Association Laboratory, it's such a rich tapestry, Tyrone, with every thread more vibrant than the other. It's hard to describe. I started Association Laboratory in 1999 because, frankly, I was an association CEO at the time, and I was frustrated by how little objective, evidence-based decision-making was going on. I think all of us now kind of take for granted how many consultants there are in firms that advise us. But at the time, and I'm not exaggerating, in one of my final jobs before Association Laboratory, had a guy show up and he'd been fired and said, "This is what I did at my old association, so you should do it at yours." And I'm like, well, it's a different sector and a different membership, and we have different problems. But yeah, we'll do whatever got you fired at your association. And at the time, I was working in an organization of professional society of individuals who worked in strategy. So you would be like vice president of strategy for Baxter, as an example. And there were these boutique consulting firms that helped corporations devise strategy. And I thought the association community would benefit from such an approach. So, like step one is always you hang out your shingle and see if you can stay alive, and pay your rent. Step two is to kind of codify a little bit in terms of, what you are good at versus what you're not good at. And step three, frankly, is can you extend it beyond yourself? And so for me, as I started working with different associations at a very limited level back in 1999 and 2000, what became kind of a constant was you have to have good research. You can't do evidence-based or data-driven decision-making without good research. So the foundation became really that of a research company. And then the interpretation of the research is how we evolved kind of into a strategy firm. We consult on a wide variety of domains. So we do strategic planning, do membership, we do online education. We're one of the few companies that cross those domains. And then over the last few years, we've added industry sector research under the Looking Forward brand. So we do the most comprehensive environmental scan of the association strategy environment. We assess over 136 different strategies with Looking Forward solutions, and we've just completed the only industry-wide benchmark of DEI perceptions and solutions and challenges that we released on November 10. And we translate some of that into education and competency development, summits and meetings and white papers and things of that nature. So it's interesting for me, you look back at 1999, sitting in my little condo by myself, and now I'm watching my company post stuff, and I wonder who posted it. As various staff people put things onto LinkedIn and stuff like that. But it's been a fun journey. It really has. I think I about a year ago, 2 years ago, you woke up and realized it was your life's work.
Yeah.
It never starts that way. You wake up one day and realize you spent 22 years working on it. So yeah, it's been fun.
Well, Dean, you just touched on a very interesting topic, and that is not a lot of people know about the association world, or they have misperceptions about the association.
Sure.
Me, for example, I didn't know anything about it. I was going to use this as a stepping stone for a corporate job. But talk about the benefits of working for the association, and how can more people learn more about it? What can we do as associations to replace ourselves? Because we're not always going to be here. You have 20-something years. I have 20-something years. How do we find our replacements to learn more about it and talk about the benefits of it?
Years ago, the Association Forum in Chicago was one of our clients, and we did the needs assessment for them. I believe when Gary LaBranche was their CEO. And one of the things we investigated is why people became association executives and what they liked about their job, because the forum at the time was trying to figure out how to align themselves with those things. What really stood out for me and resonated with me was how interesting the work is. And so I still, to this day, this is 20 years later, remember talking to a CEO, said, my first meeting, I can't remember what she told me, like my first meeting was on finance, my next meeting's on membership, my third meeting is on our advocacy. People at relatively small organizations had substantial profit loss authority. Think of some 28, 27-year-old meeting manager running a $2 million annual Congress as an example. So the variety of work is crazy interesting. And then the second thing I remember that really stood out for me of why I think it's a meaningful profession was a conversation I had with fraternity brother Mike. And at the time in the 80s, Procter and Gamble was, for marketing majors, would be like Apple today. That's where you went to work as a marketing major because they were well regarded for consumer marketing. And he was, working in their one of their divisions was basically a brand manager for I think it was Tide. I can't remember, but basically clothing soap, clothes washer soap. Well, I was the assistant executive director of the American Society of Clinical Oncology at the time, and so at the end of the day, he was telling me how great his job was, but at the end of the day, he was selling soap, and at the end of my day, I was curing cancer. And he got paid more than me, and everybody knew what a brand manager for Procter and Gamble did, and it was all really exciting for him. But I was curing cancer, and that used to be a story I would tell when I was still single. I'd tell girls, it's like, well, like, I don't know what you're doing, but I'm curing cancer. So I could say it with a straight face if I could ever conjure a straight face. But I think those two aspects make our career track incredibly compelling. There is a wide range of work within associations and the companies surrounding associations, whether it's suppliers or hospitality, whatever it might be. There's just nothing but interesting work you can work on. There's nothing but interesting arenas within which you can work on it. Are you interested in industrial disciplines or science or healthcare, whatever it might be, civil rights? And then you will have the ability to make an impact within an organization, because we're, for the most part, pretty small organizations, associations, in ways you'll never make at Apple or Google. They're one of the big name companies that everyone, quote, wants to work for. And then at the end of the day, I think we often downplay the mission a little bit, which is, you're curing cancer, or you're improving civil rights, or you're making sure small businesses aren't regulated out of existence, et cetera.
You're making a difference.
Fun, frankly.
Yeah. So let's talk about the young professionals. I saw on your webpage how, you have a series about young professionals. What's going to appeal to them to get involved in the business? I mean, aren't these causes good enough for them to get involved in the business versus to become an association professional versus going into the corporate world?
Well, one thing I think we have to correct some misperceptions that you'll somehow be paid less. There's some pretty darn lucrative jobs in association management, arguably some more lucrative than they should be. I can make the case. And so it's not that you're going to suffer in that respect. Everyone has this idea, well, I'll make all this big money in corporate America and associations are nonprofits, they pay less. That's actually not true. And there's also corporations that serve the association community. And you're still working in a sector that, so if you don't like your pay at your current job, you've got nothing but options to move. So I think one is getting rid of some of those misperceptions on what a career track within associations is. The second thing, I think our sector just has to recognize, look, we're just one other potential pathway for a person, and we have to compete for those people. Our actual environmental scan in the workforce domain, identifying, recruiting, and retaining qualified staff has been number one every single year. We've done that in 11 years, except for the last year when COVID took over. And number two was workforce. Okay. And then we asked, well, what do you have to do? And it's basically about recruiting a more diverse workforce and giving them a more satisfying career trajectory. Well, we as a sector have to do that. Just like every other sector, we're competing for the best and brightest. And so what we as a sector have to do is accurately communicate you can have a long, storied, and enjoyable career with associations. And you are not, and I should really say the association sector. So again, the way I describe it, I've worked for a captive association. I've worked for an association management company. Now I have a consulting firm. So 3 different trajectories, all within the same sector, serving the same audiences. And so you have a tremendous amount of flexibility. If I work for a Whole Foods, let's say, is a grocery store or a car manufacturer. There's only so many car manufacturers, but there's 50,000 plus associations. I can move across the country and work for a similar association in Sacramento that has similar structures, similar government, the whole bit. It's a very transportable career path. So I think there's tremendous benefits, and we just have to communicate that to young people, which I discovered is becoming I used to be, I wonder why my association was full of so many old people. Now I wonder why it's so full of so many young people. I haven't really figured that out yet as I got older, but.
Yeah, I agree with you that, we have to figure out a way to tell our story better as an association.
And I think we and whoever follows us 25 years now will have that same problem. I think frankly our best mechanism is, as professionals active within the sector, we frankly just introduce it to the people we know. We have a marketing assistant. He's about to come out of college, and I go, you may come to work for us. You may go work for an associate. What he wants to do is go work for like Nike or someplace like that. Like, why don't you work for the Private Clubs Association and spend your year going around to private clubs golfing? That sounds pretty fun too. And he's kind of like, wait, that could be a job? I'm like, yeah. Had us, working on sponsorship for private clubs or some equivalent thing like that. You spend half your life on the golf course and the other half of your life in eating great dinners while you travel around the country. That sounds like a pretty darn fun job to me. In fact, maybe the more I say it, the more I'll go for that job. I'll have to call my friend up and hire me to do it. That sounds like my retirement job.
That's right.
Yeah, but again, he just doesn't know those jobs exist.
Right.
This is a sector where we're made up of thousands of small businesses. A big association has 50 staff, a big one. And so compared to corporate America, where, we're not even a blip as individual organizations. Mm-hmm. As a sector, there's nothing but opportunity everywhere, because there are associations everywhere on every topic. So, yeah.
Yeah, because, don't you agree that we make a huge economic impact that we don't tell that story either?
Yeah, I know. I think the Association Forum has done some studies on that. It kind of depends where you want to draw the line on how much money it creates. But it's, just the hotel and hospitality industry is part of it. Now add in, here's the way I describe it sometimes. A lot of these are small organizations as associations, but they sit at the fulcrum of an industry. So a small association setting standards for manufacturing, as an example, has a huge impact. Maybe they got 10 staff is all they've got. They're a tiny organization, but you got multi-million and billion-dollar manufacturers who operate based on what that association creates. And so, and where it works, it means everything you buy, you can plug into the wall. And where it doesn't work, you have to have 17 power cords to plug in your phone based on where you're at and what kind of phone you have. So there's your evidence of why standards are good.
Yeah.
But again, the impact you can have at what is a small organization is tremendous on complicated, long-range issues.
I agree with you. Talk to us about some trends that you're seeing that we should be aware of, and that not just now, but also maybe 5 years down the road, because I think things are going to keep shifting like they always do. Every industry has shifts, has changes. What do you see?
We see a couple of things. Again, we've done these 3 studies this year, and they are the first environmental scans post-pandemic. So we're starting to get a picture of what the pandemic has done to us. And there's a couple of themes we see. One is we're not going to forget the innovations we learned during the pandemic. Any organization. If you're a restaurant and you suddenly do delivery and takeout, you're going to give up that revenue stream next year because the pandemic's over? No. Same for associations. You just did a successful virtual conference. You're never going to do another one now that you can go face to face. So we're gonna live with the benefits of those adaptations from now on. They will simply be part of our decision making. And all the organizations we interact with will do the same thing. 2 is we've gone from movement of, I call it from cell to cell. You might leave your house, drive to Starbucks, get a coffee, drive to the office, work there, walk down the street and have lunch with friends, that sort of thing. And you went from point to point to point to point. Over the last year and a half, a lot of us have had a lot of our lives centralized in our house. Maybe we educated our kids at home, entertainment at home, etc. Well, it's not so much that we won't go back. It's that the length of the pandemic has changed our behavioral pattern. And so now that you've changed your behavioral pattern, do you want to go back? And my example is my wife and I used to travel all the time. She commuted to San Antonio. I traveled half the time. And we belonged to a health club in downtown Chicago, a big, fancy, nice one. And I would go there to work out. I'd go there to have dinner, have a drink, meet some friends, all this kind of stuff. Well, as a result of the pandemic, we have dropped that membership and we bought a Peloton bike, and so for a year and a half, I've exercised out of my house. Like, I have no intention of rejoining that club. Why would I? My behaviors have changed.
Right.
So what we do on environmental skiing is trying to get a sense of what is the systemic change. So that's the second big thing. The third big thing is simply just accelerating, which is technology. Anything and everyone can now talk to everything and everyone, and so when your doorbell tells you someone is at the door, that's an example. When your car tells you the dealer it's time for maintenance, that's an example. Well, what that does is effectively get rid of geographic boundaries between markets, competitors, et cetera. So being a state association like the Colorado Society of Realtors, well, you get information from anywhere in the world. You can send it anywhere in the world. That geographic distinction no longer exists for information or for money. And then two, the barriers to participating are effectively zero. Anybody who's posted an article on LinkedIn, I'm old enough to remember we had to buy lists. And actually, a big association asset used to be maintaining this list that no one else could access because it was hard to do and expensive to do. If you wanted to contact physicians, as an example, or contact realtors. Well, now you can do it effectively for free on these technology platforms. So that effectively incentivizes individual to individual interaction, not individual through organization to individual interaction. It bypasses what associations traditionally have vetted and controlled. And I think that started pre-pandemic. That's just continued.
Yeah. Don't you find it interesting that, we were talking about labor shortages here the other day. I don't see the labor shortages when it comes to the associations. I mean, for our association, we've been fully staffed. We've actually added people to our staff. Why is that? Why do you think that there's such a huge disparity when it comes to association and people not leaving the labor force versus the corporate world?
I think I would disagree a little bit that there isn't some labor issues within the association sector. It depends what you're trying to get someone to do. So if you need to hire a meeting planner, for example, there's a whole sector of our industry that's designed to identify, train, and produce those individuals. Try and hire someone to do content marketing and management for you. It's a lot harder. So if I wanted to, we hired a new strategist in the midst of the pandemic, and I had probably 25 people within a week asked to take part in that job, ranging from CEOs to, kind of people in their mid-30s. And a month ago, we started to hire a content and digital marketing manager, somebody at the implementation stage. Haven't got a phone call, haven't got a resume, haven't got a lick of interest in it. Because the needs of not just our sector, but the corporate sector for that skill set are so big. And so it depends what you're trying to hire. So for me, for example, hiring a strategist is effectively impossible. You have to teach them how to be strategists because they might know they know what associations are, but they never had to apply their skill set. And that's what consulting is applying your skill set. And so we have to teach them to be a strategist. And you can't hire someone and say, now go out and be a strategist. So there are jobs that are in great demand, like in content marketing, that are going to be hard to get a good person for associations too. There are jobs that are unique to us that you simply have to teach, would be like a strategist for us who understands the association market. And then you got jobs, frankly, there's just a lot of people. I think meeting planner, where you've got a whole sector of the industry is churning them out. And that's not a bad thing. It just means there's more availability. And so I think the association sector is going to struggle with some of that too. Again, if you see the associations evolving from dominated by face-to-face to more of a portfolio approach between face-to-face and digital online relationships, think how many staff members you might have and the amount of money you spend on face-to-face meetings. Now look at how much you spend on digital strategy and the underlying technology infrastructure. And it's the digital side and technology side where you're going to see the growth. And that's what the pandemic accelerated. And there's only so many people who know how to do that. There's a lot who say they know how to do it, by the way, including all the consulting side. But there aren't many that actually know how, sadly. And the ones that are good are crazy expensive, as they should be. So,
well, that was going to be my next question about, okay, so you think that, it could be a little bit tough hiring for some specific positions, but doesn't that lend to the rise of the using consultants more so because you can get probably a more qualified consultant,
yeah,
but you don't have to pay them the benefits that come along with the salary.
It kind of depends, and this is actually um, so I wish that were so. Let's put it that way. And this is actually an ongoing conversation with the consultants community at the American Society of Association Executives. So it depends on your role. Okay, there are consultants who act really as de facto staff. Okay, and historically that would have been a really easy. You had an outsourced designer, let's say, who would lay out your newsletters and stuff like that. And they were never employed, but they were on contract. So there are some consultants who think of their role as being adjunct staff. There are other consultants that are really designed to apply, who are positioning themselves to apply their unique skill set to a unique problem. And you see a lot of strategic planning. There's a lot of people who promote themselves as strategic planners, but what they're doing really is promoting themselves as a moderator or facilitator of strategic planning discussion. Okay, so you'll hire Jim or Linda or whoever it might be, to for whatever reason, to kind of moderate that conversation at your board level. Okay, but it's a distinct start point and end point of that engagement. And then kind of the third tier is where I put Association Laboratories, some of our competitors, some other good firms, frankly, where you get a broader skill set, a more intense or in-depth level of knowledge. And so you tend to have more complicated engagements, but they still tend to be start point, end point. And so it might be a 2-year engagement instead of a 2-month one, but they're still limited in time frame. And then finally, there are organizations, to your point, and we use them too as a firm, where they're contractual relationships, but it's an ongoing service. So we contract with a technology company to oversee all our technology and web hosting and all that kind of stuff. So I don't have an IT person. We contract with an association management company for office operations and finance and things of that nature. So I don't have to hire an accountant. And so when you think of the consulting side of it, there are different roles they play. And in understanding what role you want your consultant to play is part of that buy purpose. So people will hire us to research and develop strategy, but then it often gets translated then into some other firm for implementation or back to staff for implementation, because that's a better role for those other companies or them than for us. And you want to understand that in the buy decision. That's pretty nerdy on consulting, by the way. Sorry, I get that question very often. So
That's awesome.
I can see everybody writing that down right now. It's like, that'll be the hot button issue that everybody wants to talk to me about.
So. That's right. So let's shift gears a little bit. Diversity, equity, inclusion.
Okay.
There is a huge focus on that in the association world.
Sure.
But what I'm finding, especially with our local associations, they're struggling with that. They're struggling with how to make diversity, equity, and inclusion effective in their association.
Yeah.
And as a core part of it, not just externally, but also internally. What advice would you give associations who are struggling with that?
Well, that's a good segue. So our third study is the first sector benchmark in DEI, perceptions, challenges, and solutions. And this came out of us. We did a study for the American College of Surgeons early summer of this year across 60 surgical societies and boards of surgery to inform their anti-racism summit in June. And so it was an interesting process to go through. And because there's a couple of issues here that I think make it difficult, but as a result, make it a particularly useful role for associations. One is a variety of issues are conflated and intermingled. So for example, I was working on this morning on my presentation for our November 10th release of this data, but we routinely talk about DE&I, and we put everything together. But diversity is really an outcome. You can look at your membership and say, yes, we are diverse, however you define that. Inclusion is kind of a concept that we all kind of get. You're welcome. Equity is less well defined and arguably more controversial. So for example, where in health outcomes, it's often talked about is regardless of, tall, short, whatever, race, ethnicity, we should have the same, Dean as a white man should have a better health outcome for, eyebrow cancer than a black man as an example. So health equity in terms of equal outcomes is more, there's a better consensus on it in healthcare. But in a lot of places, people are still struggling with what it means. So what you have are 3 distinct concepts that get conflated. And the more conflated everything becomes, the harder it is to talk about it, to isolate what you really want. Okay, and they all sound great. No one's coming against individual concepts. Nobody doesn't want diversity, as an example, but at least publicly, but it's but all these other aspects of it get brought into that conversation. And where I think the associations can play a good role is to start to unbundle the complexity of these topics and create an atmosphere that's more positive for its discussion. So one of the issues that occurred was frankly philosophical differences over and this was specific to race with the American College of Surgeons. So it wasn't the broader diversity, it was specific to race, was that by introducing race into the concept of how we consider healthcare, what that was negating the historical concept of a colorblind patient exam. We don't care who you are and what you look like, whether you have money, etc. When you're on the operating table, you do the best you can do. And so there was a component of the surgical leadership who saw the incorporation of race as a qualifier on that philosophy. And therefore, the philosophy of the colorless evaluation is completely positive. The incorporation of the concepts of diversity and inclusion is completely positive. So this is not a good versus bad choice. They're just different philosophical approaches to how you treat this person who shows up on an operating table. And it was a visceral and angry and controversial conversation. And so for associations to understand that, for the most part, everyone's trying to do the right thing. Everyone's trying to be good. Okay, right. It's not a good versus evil debate. Okay, and if we frame it as a good, like these members are right and everyone else is wrong, or these ones are sexist and these are not, or these hate whatever and other, if we create that negative positive binary, what we do is we destroy the platform of associations for conversations that are critical to making our communities better places to live and work. And I think that's where associations have a great opportunity on these sorts of conversations. But we have to respect that just because we all rattle off DEI really fast doesn't mean everyone has the same notion of what that means, or that everyone has makes it the same priority. And so I have two issues that come out of so far that have come out of the study for me. And so you're going to be the inaugural one. One is a lot of associations in our study talk about DEI just broadly. It all got conflated, but DEI broadly as a value. Well, is it a value or is it a program? So when we do strategic planning now, a lot of organizations have a DEI kind of track. Well, do you have an honesty track? Isn't honesty a value? And so if it's a value, shouldn't you treat it like honesty? But if it's a strategy, let's say we want to improve the diversity of the profession as an example, that's a different animal. And so I think a lot of associations are struggling with, is this a value that gets incorporated, or is it a program or strategy that we implement? And both are good, and I think what we're seeing on the sector side is, as a result of that kind of back and forth, it's elevated DEI from a human resource discussion to a senior executive and board leadership discussion. It's basically going up the chain. And that's great news for those issues, because it's being talked about at the board level and the CEO level, not as an HR issue. Okay. So that's one thing. The second one that I think will be more controversial. And so I'll trial balloon it here with you. You can't hardly go to a modern association without finding a statement of inclusion. Like, we want to create a conclusion, blah, blah, blah. And there's various wordings and they're all really positive and no one's against them. But a lot of associations are creating associations that are structurally exclusive. I'll give you examples for myself. I was talking to an association about becoming a member. And I was talking to the CEO and he says, oh yeah, we have this great women's executive forum. Oh wait, you can't come to that. Oh, then we've got this great emerging leader. Oh wait, you can't come to that either. And then he kind of trailed off and talked about a happy hour I might be able to stop by. So the first two things he tells me I can't come to because of my gender, and I can't come to because of my age. But if you go to the website, it'll promote how exclusionary or how inclusive they are. So everyone has the best motivations, but the structure of his association is exclusionary. And so what I'm experimenting with is this metaphor of a house party. And so we all know what a good house party is. You walk through the door and everyone says hi, and somebody welcomes you, and you can kind of see yourself in the room.
Right.
And like, yeah, are you hungry? There's food over there. Are you thirsty? There's drinks over there. And then you just have a great time talking to all these interesting people, and there's kind of a shared bond. There's some commonality between all of you, you know. What if you showed up at that same house party and someone said, hey, Tyrone, welcome. Hey, people just like you are in that room over there. Why don't you go over there? You'll really like talking to all those folks. And the person, and I come in behind you and they're like, hey, Dean, welcome. I'm glad you could come. People just like you, I mean, different than Tyrone, but you know, they're in that other room. Why don't you go over there? That's what structural exclusion is.
Yeah, I would probably leave that party.
The best idea. Like everyone's completely positive in their motivations. So I'm not questioning anyone's motivations.
Right.
But if you lose the common bond of the community, it doesn't mean that you can't have different interests. Maybe you're thirsty and I'm hungry. That's fine. We go our separate ways. Okay. But if you separate us the minute we walk through the door based on some characteristic we can't control, that's a structural exclusion. And my fear is that's where associations are walking down that pathway.
And so, to that note, when we create additional benefits for specific groups, that's the same thing, isn't it?
Well, and that's the debate. You know, there are now there are regulations, for example, financial services marketing that are much more restrictive because historically those restrictions were used to support redlining, which is, if you're familiar with that, you know, was designed to make sure that our black friends lived in one neighborhood and our white friends lived in a different one.
Yep.
And it was racist.
Property values did not rise as high as the other ones.
Yeah, exactly. And it was very effectively racist, you know, living in Chicago. So it completely did exactly what it was designed to do. It was wrong. And as a result, there's a lot of, you know, regulations that now restrict that. My wife works in financial services, so I know that, by the way. I'd like to say I just read it all because I'm too lazy to do that. So I think that's a matter of debate. Here's the way we've kind of approached it at Association Laboratory. So what over the years, you know, we do these member needs assessments and stuff like that. And we start looking, are there differences between audiences? And let's picture you and I, we're both surgeons. Okay. And, you know, and we're different. We come from maybe different schools, different family backgrounds, you know, we look different, whatever it might be. Okay. And we can identify that on the survey. Okay. And so Tyrone likes this, Dean likes this, blah, blah. And here's where we're similar and here we're different. What we discovered is, well, you're an orthopedic surgeon and I'm an orthopedic surgeon. Our practices are similar. We're both owners within that practice. Our needs don't diverge. It has nothing to do with black and white. It's the environment within which we work. And so we found we still test it, but I can't remember the last time we took an individual demographic like race or gender and found a difference in needs. Because you and I are the same surgeon practicing the same practice. We have the same problems, same pain, wherever it is, you know, we'll have a greater variation if I'm an owner and you are not, or vice versa, because the financial interest will change it. And so we often confuse causation with correlation. And that's the mistake a lot of people make. And as, oh, okay, we did this separation and we can see the separation by you and I, by race, let's say. But when we really look at it, it's because you own your practice and I'm an employee of mine. And that's where our needs separate. Or you have a different patient base than I. I do sports surgery and you do non-sport surgery. Okay, I'm getting, my metaphor is failing me now. So a lot of times we look at the picture of the person and think that's what causes their needs, and it simply correlates with other factors. And so for us, on a strategy standpoint, you have to ask yourself what is correlative and what is causative, and is the difference so substantial that you would do anything different as a result? And so that's, and I think the third thing I would add into this is my earlier conversation about the not being allowed to go to the women's program. Women are overwhelmingly the majority of that organization. So why don't you picture an organization where you and I as men are, we're part of this organization. 80% of the folks are men, and we did it. We're going to do a special program just for the men, and we're going to talk about unique leadership challenges that men face. And the women who are in the minority aren't going to be allowed to attend. Does that sound like an inclusive organization to you? Yeah.
Wow.
It's hard.
It's tough.
It's fun though. It's honest God, it's fun.
Yeah.
My wife is active. She's a managing director at PwC, and they're really active in this. Their CEO is very visible. And I go back to this. Whatever you personally believe, whatever your personal background, not you specifically, Tyrone, there is no better place for discussion of these issues in the association community. It's almost literally what they're designed to do.
Yeah.
Take a professional or industrial community, put us all together, address a topic of concern, and figure out what we all want to do about it. And we can isolate ourselves from the heat but lack of light at the national level. We can aggregate across industries and professions, so individual geographic locations and their history don't dominate every other conversation. So they're great venues for these kind of conversations. The conversations have been elevated to the highest levels of leadership, and its board and CEO are driving it. And that comes out of our study. And there's no better place for it to be discussed, and no better topic to be discussed than the association level. And so I think it's an exciting, frankly, but we have to recognize it's hard. Hard is complicated, not hard as in controversial. It's just they're complicated issues, and we have to respect the difficulty of those conversations.
Dean, I wish we can continue this conversation, but I know this is like a 30-minute podcast, but this information is awesome. You've been a great guest on this podcast. And I don't know, you have a webinar coming up on this, right?
So on November 10, it's free for everybody. We're doing the inaugural release of the data from our DEI study. Everybody attend, one is free. Everybody who participates gets it. There's an executive summary of the data that we send as just a nice PDF. And then you can access the Looking Forward dashboard. So Looking Forward dashboard is an online tool that allows you to look at all three data sets: Looking Forward Impact, Looking Forward Solutions, and Looking Forward DEI, and customize it to your needs. So do you want to look at state level only? Do you want to look at healthcare only? And so we've released all three data sets to the public. And you can customize it and download what you need and talk to your board and staff about it. But November 10, and that's on our website at associationlaboratory.com. So I apologize, I can't rattle off the exact time. And again, we've got 300 plus registrants right now. And we've just started the marketing. We had to expand our Zoom license for it. But there's some interesting things, as I said, that's coming out of that. The world within which associations live and work is changing. It has always been changing and will continue to change on us. But I think our ability to adapt to that change is getting better as executives. The information we need to guide those decisions is getting better, thanks to, frankly, our work and others. And if not us, who? And if not now, when? That's kind of my
totally agree.
Yeah. And there's nothing but opportunity for people at every age and every competency level to have fun within our sector. It's been 36 years for me, almost 46, whatever. 56 minus 21, not a math consultant. So it's fun to be part of it. And I really appreciate being part of this podcast, Tyrone. It's been really fun.
Wow, you just left us with a lot of things to think about as associations. And I hope people tune into your webinar. I know I'm going to try to do it. And also my professional development coordinator, I'm going to try to get her on board as well to make sure that she tunes into it.
Yeah,
I'd like to thank everybody else in the audience for joining Dean and I in this conversation. Until next time, take care of yourselves, be kind, and just make somebody else day a little bit more brighter. Have a great day, everyone.